Hello and welcome to week 12 of Macma Literacy with me, Miss Matt Mullen. This week we're talking about some words from maths. We're done with all of those skills. We're done with the exam things. We're back to subjects. So, maths coming up next. Hello, our first word for maths is inverse. Now, inverse means the opposite action of something. Now, that doesn't mean opposite in general. It doesn't mean, left, right. It means the opposite action. So when you are doing something, the reverse of it, essentially. Now, let's take a look at our Freya model to look at this word in a little bit more detail. Now, as I've said, the definition is the opposite action. A characteristic of this is that the opposite actions are directly related to each other. Now, as you'll see from my examples, I've put that division is the inverse of multiplication. Now, when I've said that they're directly related to each other, that means that multiplication is also directly related to division. So if you say that 4 divided by 2 is 2, then 2 times 2 must be 4. This also works for addition being the inverse of subtraction, because subtraction is therefore also the inverse of addition. So if you say 2 plus 2 equals 4, then 4 minus 2 is 2. So you'll see that it's the same numbers being involved. We're simply using the inverse action. So non-examples of this, things that are simply not anything to do with inverse, would be multiplication and addition. They're not inverse of each other, and division and subtraction are not inverse to each other. This word is quite similar to the word invert, which is to put something upside down or in the opposite position. So if you have an ornament sitting on the shelf and then you turn it over, then you would be inverting it. So those words are very similar origins. And this brings us on to our next word, which is correlation. Now, a correlation between two things is like a connection between them. So this can be between two or more things. And you usually find a correlation when you're looking at some form of graph or table. So when you look at this, say graph, for example, you notice that there's a pattern between two or more things. It seems when one thing happens, the other one does too. Of course, this doesn't actually mean that they are connected. So that would be causation. It is important to know the difference between correlation and causation. If you see a pattern on a graph and you think that there's a possibility that the two things are connected, that the two factors have some kind of impact on each other, until you have proof of that, you don't have causation, it's simply a correlation. And sometimes correlations are just coincidence. So let's have a look at our Freya model for correlation. As we've already said, our definition is a mutual relationship or a connection between two or more things. Our characteristics are that when one thing happens, the other does too, but this doesn't necessarily mean that they're connected. I've already mentioned causation in that sense. Our synonyms are connected, pattern, or similarity, and they're obviously connected isn't that strict a synonym, as I've just said that they're not necessarily connected. Our example is I sneeze a lot more in summer, but I don't know if this is because of pollen, so it might just be a coincidence. Now that would become causation once I had been to the doctors and had allergies diagnosed. Antonyms of this are random and unconnected because, of course, the two things, whether or not one causes the other, there's still some form of connection because there's a similarity in pattern, and we can see that in its correlation on the graph. So antonyms would be random and unconnected. And non-examples would be I sneeze all year and it has no connection to the season at all. So there would be no correlation between those things. And that is correlation. And it brings us on to our final word, which is divisible. Now, if one number is divisible by another, that means that it can be divided by that in a whole number sort of sense. So 4 is divisible by 2, it's divisible by 1, it's not divisible by 3 because it doesn't cut into a clean whole number when you use it to divide. Divisible can also be used to describe something that can be divided as well. So what I would like you to do now is fill out this Freya model yourself using the word divisible. So I would like you to put in a definition. I'd like you to add some characteristics of things that are divisible. I would like you to add in an example. You don't need to do synonyms. An example and a non-example. So an example of something that is divisible and an example of something showing no divisibility at all. Amazing, and that brings us on to the spellings. So if first of all you could spell inverse, so if you could spell inverse. And now correlation, so correlation. And divisible, if you could spell divisible. Excellent, and there they are on the board, so check your spelling. Specifically, I think the correlation, make sure that your R's and L's are correct in amount. And the end of the word divisible. And we'll try again, so inverse. Correlation. Divisible. There they are again. And finally, inverse. Correlation. And divisible. There we go. Of course, you're always welcome to go over them again if you feel like any of them are still confusing you. And your final task is just to write out the correctly spelled word with your own definition of it, along with the dual code. Excellent. And that is us for this week. So I will see you, or you will see me, next week. And thank you for joining me. If you enjoy starting with a word and then ending up in a rambling journey to who knows where, then I suggest that you hit like and subscribe. Also, if you just want to be a pal, like and subscribe. See you next week.